I'm Andrew Murata, host of the Education, Leadership, and Beyond podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Michael Lopez, Ph.D. He is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives in Early Childcare at ClassWallet. Our focus today is talking about how ClassWallet helps organizations create more effective purchasing and reimbursement procedures. Oh, this is such a cool talk. Great information. And I just want you to know, this may sound a little bit like a commercial, but it's not. They're not an advertiser with Teaching Learning Leading K12, nor a sponsor. And it is something that I'm very much interested in as we take old situations with paper, that paper processes that in order to get things approved and so forth, and create better, more electronic, digital ways in which to have the ability to purchase and be reimbursed. And I find this quite interesting. So just want you to know that. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing. And oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you took time to help out the podcast. And here are a couple ways in which you could. One of the ways is to tell a friend and share the links to my show. Another one is go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And finally, how about click on a link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. By doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. So cool. Thanks for doing that. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
According to the National Education Association, some school teachers spend up to $500 to $750 of their own money to ensure that the students get the supplies they need. That's criminal. As you and your audience know, most teachers and our EC providers don't have enough extra cash to make such purchases, even if there's a chance of getting reimbursed.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Michael Lopez, Ph.D., is ClassWallet's Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives in Early Childcare. With an impressive record spanning over 30 years, Mike brings a wealth of experience in applied policy-relevant research, particularly in the areas of early care and education and equity at the national, state, and local levels. His expertise and dedication make him a national early childhood expert and a passionate advocate for low-income, culturally, and linguistically diverse populations. Our focus will be helping program administrators ensure they are able to get the supplies they need without having classroom teachers and administrators spend their own money or endure cumbersome reimbursement processes. Michael, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Well, hello and good morning, Steve. First, I'd like to just thank you for having me on the podcast today to talk about this very important topic. It may not be as sexy as the latest instructional advances, but the challenges that many educators face around purchasing and reimbursement processes for supplies and services are real and can make or break how well educators are able to work their teaching magic. More importantly, as you covered in one of your prior podcasts, the latest advances in technology can help streamline and improve so many of our day-to-day processes. There's been longstanding challenges that have been further intensified by the COVID pandemic. And with staffing shortages and burnout, and it really is a bit of a crisis. So what do? I work for a company called ClassWallet, which we'll talk about a little more detail in a few minutes. And I joined the organization earlier this year in order to help ClassWallet expand the K-12 footprint into the early childhood space. I work closely with some amazing colleagues throughout the company, drawing upon that 30 years of experience that you mentioned in the EC space in both the federal and private sector. For example, for anyone familiar with Head Start, they probably are familiar with some of the major national studies I led, such as the Head Start Impact Study, the Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, or FACES, among others. These have been some of the gold standard accountability efforts for not only the federal Head Start program, but also have influenced the broader EC as a whole. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Excellent. And I appreciate you being here. And one of the things I got to make sure I say right here is that, this is As we talk about ClassWallet, just want my audience to know that there's no sponsorship here. This is, I'm curious about this just as much as you all should be as well. And because I got some great stories that go with this where the process just really didn't work against the person trying to do the ordering. I didn't work for the person who's doing the ordering. And it's something that I've, as I explained before we started recording, kind of prided myself in the idea of trying to create paperless environments where, approval processes, that there's a flow and it works out better than this whole thing that it might go here and sit on this desk and then go here and sit on this desk. And maybe eventually you get something eventually in a month and a half or something like that, or it gets lost. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So we've talked a little bit about what you do, and let's talk a little bit more in depth about what ClassWallet's purpose is.
Sure. Well, the quick answer is that ClassWallet is a financial technology company that unlocks the full potential of every public dollar. That's kind of simple, straightforward. What do we do? Well, since 2014, we've helped agencies all across the country ensure that public funds reach the right people and are used for the right purpose. And how do we do that? Well, we do it through our digital wallet platform, kind of as you alluded to. Digital wallets streamline and automate processes that are traditionally manual, labor and time intensive, as well as prone to errors. That's the one part that you didn't mention in your previous comment, prone to errors. We'll come back to that. This results in greater efficiency, reduced staff burdens, increased satisfaction, better outcomes, and improved fiscal accountability and compliance with funding requirements.
Very cool. So, one of the things that, there's just so much that goes here with this. And especially if you've ever worked in, because my audience is made up of all kinds of educators, all right, from pre-service to school district level to post-secondary instructors in administration as well. And then all those in between, anybody who, most of which not only do they teach, but they may not teach, but they may be, they have to order, or they have to make sure that they're purchasing products, and they have to go through making sure they have the funds allocated and so forth. And some of them experience some some difficult times. So let's talk about one of the constant concerns as an educator: a teacher administrator spending his own money on needed resources. What do you know about this?
Well, this is a huge problem. I know a lot of educators. Sister who's a teacher, actually retired teacher, a niece, neighbors, a lot of educators. And this is a common problem, as you say. According to the National Education Association, some school teachers spend up to $500 to $750 of their own money to ensure that the students get the supplies they need. That's criminal. As you and your audience know, most teachers and or EC providers don't have enough extra cash to make such purchases, even if there's a chance of getting reimbursed. Furthermore, even if teachers or EC providers have a budget to purchase their own materials, like you say, this often requires a lengthy reimbursement process, and sometimes for the materials to be approved before purchasing. So like you mentioned, it can take weeks or months for reimbursement, and an enormous amount of paperwork and frustration.
Yeah, it's such an interesting aspect of it, because I got to tell this story. One of my all-time favorite ones was I was yearbook sponsor. And I was brand new to it, and there's a photographer. And by the way, I'm going to really date myself because some of this stuff is completely done digitally now. But in those days, a photographer would come in that you selected, and what they would do is they'd train your staff, and they would always do things like provide either an account so that you could have pictures developed, or they teach you how to develop the pictures, or they would make sure that you. At the time I came on board, they were two types. They were doing the 35 millimeter stuff, and they were doing digital stuff. And so they were going to provide the camera, but they said, you might want to check with your system first to see if they have some money for you to purchase some equipment like this. So I did, and ordered the camera they suggested I order. And someone at purchasing decided that wasn't the right camera that I should get. And instead of this really nice camera that the photographers the photography studio wanted us to have so they could teach us how to have the kids how to do this and become future photographer type stuff. They ordered a little dinky thing that probably was, it was like, that was one of those really, you open up the box at Christmas time and, it's just not what you thought it was going to be in that box.
Exactly.
But someone made the decision. My point in telling that whole long story is that someone made that decision that, no, this is not what you need. We're going to get you this.
It's wild.
A little problematic. It's so let's talk about, some of the stuff. So I got to tell you, as a club sponsor, you started thinking, well, maybe I'll just spend my own money. And as a teacher, you don't want to go through those processes. So you just, go to any number of big box stores today or wherever, and you just say, well, I'll just go ahead and buy this, and it'll work. It'll all work out. It'll all come out in the wash, and I'll be good. Any thoughts about this type of stuff?
Well, as we mentioned, it is a real challenge. I mean, and you have to think about it in terms of what are you doing with your time as an educator. And so in addition to spending the money, having to get all these approvals and all the hoops you have to jump through, that means that you're not doing some of the things that you want to do. And if your passion is teaching, you're spending more of your time on navigating these clunky, outdated processes and procedures, not to mention spending some of your own money. And then on the administrative side, think about it from the program administrators. Within this day and age of accountability, there's a greater scrutiny on how you're spending your money, and especially how you're spending public funds. I worked in the federal government for 14 years, and I was there in the early 90s when the beginning of the accountability movement with the Government Performance and Results Act, GPRA. I don't know if you're at all familiar with that, but that was the start of the whole accountability movement for accountability and compliance of the use of federal funds. And so it's trickled down to state funds and local funds that people want to know how those public dollars are being spent. So you're having to jump through all these hoops and administrators really have to be careful of how those dollars are being spent and how to be mindful of spending.
Gotcha. And, one of I have to say this, by the way, to end my story, the photographer took care of me with the camera. They said, oh, that's not going to do you any good. You can use that as an extra. And they bought me one. They bought not me personally, they bought the yearbook group one. And then they decided, you need more than one. They bought us two. So it was like, nice. So that solved itself because that way I didn't ever have to have any more communication with the person who made the choice that was above me. But, it is something that's been constant because I taught in the classroom a while ago, and it is still something that you have issues with them using their own monies and such, and having to go through a reimbursement process, if there is one, because a lot of times they're buying their own stuff. And today with the world as it is in this digital world where they might set up even just different types of funding situations, which the school system may or may not support, because sometimes they're a little concerned about the messages that sends. And, there's all kinds of stuff here. And so one of the directions I want to go right now is that you're talking about some of the administrative and compliance, and I'm going to use a term, burdens that might interfere with purchasing for schools and stuff like that. Can we go that direction just a little bit? What sorts of things are there to make administrators because I think you've already mentioned once when we have a federal law that's like, whoa, wait a second, I don't want to be breaking federal law here. So can you talk a little bit about why these get created, these, lengthy sorts of approval systems and such?
Well, to me, I think part of it is having been in the federal government. Part of it is that we want to know the accountability, where those funds are going and how they're being used. And so how do you do that? If you do, I just think about it from the point of view of I'm the one at home, just take my own personal. I'm the one at home who does the taxes and pays the bills, except for the health stuff. And so I can tell you I have nightmares of doing taxes at the end of the year where I take over the dining room table and I have to go and manually find all those documents, all those receipts, all the paperwork in order to fill everything out to be compliant with my taxes. That's a good parallel. It's like, how do you do that as a school administrator, and how do you go about making sure that everything's streamlined, that you have all those things in one place? And I think about what was our life like before online bill paying or Venmo or Amazon or other similar resources, right? How many times have you gone, I'm an avid Amazon user. How many times have you gone on to Amazon and say, when did I buy this? What did I buy? How much did I pay? Especially if I have to report some of that on my taxes and I need those receipts. It's great. It's all streamlined. It's all in one place when I ordered it. And of course, I'm also the one who, my wife and I talk about it at the when our daughter comes home and says, "Oh, I need this by tomorrow for a field trip for a project." What do? Go online, order it, and sure enough, it shows up the next day. So that kind of technology support to really, like digital wallets, to help you efficiently manage those resources and keep all that paperwork kind of in line, so that when it comes time to reconcile the books, you have all that right there, and it doesn't get lost. It's all integrated, and it makes it a lot easier and less time spent on all that administrative work.
So let's go into some details about actually, creating a spending funding process that allows you to streamline purchasing a little bit. I mean, how do you what do you envision that as? What is it that makes it work better?
Well, I've been spending a lot of time in my role here at ClassWallet, talking with a lot of Head Start programs, since I've spent the past 30 years working in the Head Start arena. And one of the questions I usually ask them is, walk me through the process that if a teacher in a center needs to order something, what do they do? And that's the most illuminating discussion I have, because a lot of times programs, if you just ask them, what do? They say, well, we have our systems in place. We've been doing it this way and we're good. But then I ask them, and I have to tell you, Steve, there have been a couple of times when, this is 2024, when a couple of program administrators said, well, a teacher will take a 3-part carbon paper form, fill it out, manually deliver it to the central office, and then it has to go manually be delivered to 3 different people in the central office before it gets to the procurement office. And then the procurement person has to fill out another form, a purchase order, then it has to get sent to the vendors, and then it has to come back. And then, of course, I always like the question of, and so at the end of the year, everything runs smoothly when you're trying to audit the book, or close the books and get prepared for your audit. And they almost always, to a T, laugh, because they know how much time and effort it takes to do all that. So that's where usually a good setup for, like, what would you imagine if you had a more integrated, seamlessly integrated approach to do all that, so that you're not chasing down paperwork. You're not having frustrated teachers trying to get carbon paper all over their hands and having to wait 6 weeks to get a set of books or pencils or paper.
Right now, this is sad, because if this is happening in 2024, and I mean, anytime close within the last 10 years, it's like, and I know it is, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like that's the most, because to a teacher, especially the bigger the system, the bigger the system, and you may once in a while have to go to the central office, maybe for a meeting or some training, but for the most part, never go there. The bigger the system, and you have to walk a triplicate piece of document to some office. I mean, because in a couple of cases where I was a teacher, you had to make it past the bookkeeper first. So she was, in all cases, very fearsome. and sometimes that stopped you from ever putting in a request, because you're like, do I really want to go to that office? I don't think so. And so you just reach in your pocket and go, what the heck? I'll use this. I'll go buy this month when I go to the store or whatever.
And sometimes it's easier to go that route, but then you're putting the burden back on the teachers. And in the K12, it's one thing, but in the early childhood space that I've spent a lot of my career working on, those margins are smaller. There are many early childhood providers that can't afford to do that, but they'll do it because their commitment to their children, to students. And it's unfortunate that they have to get to that kind of decision-making process.
You got that right. It's crazy. All right. So, there's everything from purchasing to getting supplies. So there's a whole, it's its own little train. It has its flow and all this sort of stuff. So let's talk about how ClassWallet can help schools and school systems become more efficient and effective in purchasing and reimbursement procedures. How do you go about doing this?
Well, I mentioned a few minutes ago about the whole digital wallet and some of those different processes. So let me give you an example of where one of the early childhood examples that we have with the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, DECAL, since you're in Georgia.
Right.
During the pandemic, they got some COVID relief funds, and they needed a way to manage and distribute about $274 million in COVID relief funds. And they didn't have the internal capacity, like many places, to manage and distribute that kind of money efficiently and effectively, and with the kind of attention to compliance, because the feds, you heard about all the misuse of funds, and the funds, there were a lot of funds that weren't spent efficiently, that they had to then extend some of the deadlines. And so we were able to work with them and set up a digital platform for 4 separate grant programs to really help distribute the resources for supplies and professional development activities to the tune of over 4,000 EC programs around the state, and that impacted 1.6 million children in the end. And it not only saved them time and money, but also ensured that they were strictly compliant with all those federal mandates and had all the customized reports and dashboards to be accountable in the end to the federal government on how those funds were used.
So this is cool. So tell me, so let's talk for a minute about who ClassWallet's target audience is, because I would think that not necessarily the building administrator or the classroom teacher. Is it on a bigger scale, or is it at the smaller window? Who are we really focused on here?
Well, I think we're focused on multiple levels. Of course, there are many of our clients are state agencies, state child care agencies, trying to distribute funds, or like in the case of the Georgia DECAL, whether it's scholarships, stipends, but it can go down to individual school districts or individual programs. In fact, as I mentioned before, we're doing a lot of outreach to individual Head Start programs since they're federal to local. So there are multiple ways in which it has an impact and is of interest. And of course, frontline teachers and educators are clearly motivated, but ultimately the administrators of the different entities are the ones that have to make decisions. But whatever it is, it makes their lives easier. It makes their administrative process more streamlined. It reduces their burden, their workload, their burden, and improves their efficiency. Because in many cases, I think I'd mentioned this before, there's been a lot of turnover. There's been a lot of staffing shortages right now. Everyone's trying to recruit, whether it's in the K12 or the early childhood space, trying to recruit. So people are burned out and overburdened. So anything to ease their workload is going to be viewed positively, in addition to be increasingly more compliant.
Gotcha. So, all right. So now, how does an organization start connecting with ClassWallet? I mean, how do they even make it so that they can, how do they contact somebody to say, hey, I've heard this talk, they're listening to this podcast today, and they said, I want to know more, because I want to know how I get started with this. Where do you take that person? Where do they go?
It happens in many different ways. In some cases, we're doing outreach to different state agencies or different organizations. In other, as you kind of mentioned, we just had a big conference last week, the Education Commission of the States. We had lots of conversations with state policymakers and some who approached us. We get there's one effort that we did recently with the Tribal Child Care Association of California, where they heard one of my colleagues at a conference, and they approached her and said, hey, we need your help. We need to distribute some funds very quickly and need to have the paper trail. And they became, we partnered with them, and they're now think we're the greatest thing since sliced bread. So there are multiple ways, referral, word of mouth, you name it, it's probably happened.
Gotcha. So help me do this just a little bit. If the process with ClassWallet, is it all digital? Is it something that is, like it's set up through an app system? Is it, do you have desktop applications or something like this? I mean, how does it look like that? I mean, how does that function?
So No, that's a great question. ClassWallet is really a digital platform, and you can access it through a smartphone or through a laptop or a tablet. And what happens is so if we start working with an organization, we'll customize how it's set up for them so it's uniquely tailored to their needs. So it could be you set up digital wallets for each teacher in a let's just pick a school. We have or a school district. We have 20 schools in that school district, and we'd set up digital wallets for each teacher or each center director, or however they want to set it up. And then they decide how much money they want to give them access to. So let's say, for example, you want to say every teacher is going to have that $750 that we talked about earlier. We're going to set you up. So Steve, you're a teacher in school X. We're going to give you $750 or $1,000, whatever amount you're going to have that to spend on supplies. So we'll set you up with a digital wallet. You can go on, you can access the digital wallet. So it's all online. And then you can say, I want to order supplies. So you go on to your digital wallet and you can access what we call our marketplace, where we have 140 of the leading educational vendors. So if you want Scholastic or you name it, we have it. And you want to order some books. So you go on there, it's almost like you're going on Amazon. It appears very similar to the vendor sites. And you go on there and you select the items that you want, but instead of going to a pay says, okay, now you want to check out, you hit submit and it goes to whichever administrator that the program is set up to review and approve, or multiple people. So you may have it at each school. The principal approves it as a first line of defense, and then it goes to the central office, or however they want to set it up. We configure it the way they want it, and then it automatically goes to each person along the review and approval line, and then it goes directly to the vendor, and then it gets ordered. So it's all integrated into one system.
That's awesome. That's, one of the things that, constantly, one of the things that, drives you nuts in an organization where, and I can go to the one you're talking about with a triplicate form. I mean, anything that's paper like that has a sit and wait time somewhere built into it, because it's not going to be seen directly. I mean, I have an in and out box on my desk, but we eliminated a whole bunch of that stuff by simply making some sort of electronic approval process for other types of travel and things like this as well. And it's amazing what it does to the timeliness of things. I would think that. So when you set up this, does the organization work with you to set up that flow process? So you kind of work with them. So, whatever they decide, basically you're kind of working with them, probably recommending to them, but they can decide that if it needs to go through 42 people, it goes through 42 people.
Exactly. I mean, we usually try and figure out what their process is now and how they do it. And then we work with them with the back and forth on what they would like and what's possible, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it may say, well, what about if you did it this way that still achieves what you want to achieve, but it makes it even more efficient? So it's a lot of back and forth to really tailor to what they want and how they want it. So if you want to have people who have just like the rights to be able to go in and review things, but not necessarily approve things, because you might have your chief financial officer who wants to see, like, on a daily basis, I want to see what we're spending our money on and how we're spending, and like what teachers are spending. And you can get down to the item level in terms of that specificity. So however they want to set it up in terms of that whole review and approval and the workflow, that's really up to them. It's kind of an iterative process.
Hey, Mike, so while I was listening to you, one of the things that became obvious is that, and I want to go into a little more detail about, is that you have some giant store or something that the approval process deals with. Like they go, the teacher or the individual or the administrator or so forth, they actually can see some places in which they might be able to order whatever it is they're trying to order. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the approval process and all that?
So when a teacher or somebody who wants to order something, goes on to what we call our marketplace. They go into their digital wallet and they want to order something. They will go into the marketplace, and we have it's think about it as a glorified Amazon. It's a shopping marketplace, and we have over 150 vendors that are in there, like Scholastic or Lakeshore or Discovery Resources. Every major educational vendor in the country is on there, and they go in and they will select. We also have those that are not on there, but you can do what's called direct pay, where we have over 15,000 vendors who are on that. But for the marketplace, you can go and say, I want to order some school supplies. I go into Lakeshore, I go into Discovery Resources, and I identify the items that I want. I select them, and then I push submit, and instead of a pop-up box showing up, it'll go to the administrator that gets designated as the person that my organization said, this is the first line of defense for somebody to review and approve what I've ordered. And then it might automatically go to multiple reviewers and administrators until it gets to the procurement person who pushes a button, and then it gets submitted to that particular vendor. And it all happens, it gets ordered, and it's much more streamlined and integrated into a more simplified process.
That's very cool. Thanks. And that kind of takes away the whole old style thing of doing catalogs and sitting there looking through the catalog. That kind of brings that forward a little bit. I like that. Very cool. As a note, I sponsored a theater club in a high school, and this is something that I really learned about because I had to raise funds to do, to create props and all that good stuff and costumes. And one of the things I learned that makes people look sideways is, because theater, they have things called flash pots and smoke this and that. And the question comes back, you really need to have pyrotechnics in your, anyway, this would make,
and that would be a good example where me as your administrator, I would say, well, Steve can order that, but I'm going to want to have it come to me to review each time. And then we'll say, all right, Steve, let me know you're working on this play for this semester. And then that's fine. And so you can set it up any way you want it, or you can just say, yeah, whatever Steve wants, he gets, and explosives and pyrotechnics.
Yeah, that's first time I set off all of the smoke alarms in the school auditorium. We had a little talk. That was just you, right? So they got used to me after that. It's like, yes, okay, I'll tone it down a little bit. But yeah, so that's cool. That's what's really neat there is, though, it could be set up how it makes it work, the best for the organization. And I like that. That's awesome. So
another thing that's come up in some cases where there are some programs that have been, we have our system in place, and we have an online system for ordering. But when push comes to shove, when they do that workflow, when I have them walk through each step of the way, like, well, we get an online request from a teacher, and it goes to the finance office, and then they can do the approvals and reviews and approvals. But then they have to manually enter that information to each vendor's website. And it's like, well, you then take a automated process and make part of it manualized, rather than saying, let's just do it all integrated into one single integrated whole. And so there are still room for improvement. And the one that I was just talking about, they said, oh yeah, because they were kind of midstream, and they said, we can continue to improve our efficiency by doing something like ClassWallet. I mean, we're proud of our systems that we've developed to date, but we could do better. And so that's why it's always helpful to know what they're doing and how they're doing it, and whether or not something like a digital platform like ClassWallet can help them continue to improve even further, more so than those that are always back in the carbon paper manual process.
Yeah, the only thing missing there is a typewriter.
Exactly.
Nice.
Well, I didn't ask him if the typewriter is involved in that.
If they still got triplicate, it's got to be, and carbon paper, there's got to be someone sticking there. We only have one typewriter left. It's mine. Here we go. Anyway. That's
true.
Good stuff. All right. So, Mike, if if you were speaking at an educator convention and you were the last speaker for the day, what would you want the attendees to remember about ClassWallet as they left for the day?
Well, I think it goes back to what we're talking about how technology has become ubiquitous with our day-to-day living. I like to pull out my smartphone, and I was inspired by your technology podcast, by the way. But you pull out your smartphone, and it's not just used for calls or email or texting like the Palm Pilot that you were talking about before, or
Thanks.
Blackberries, right? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
But we all now use it for banking, or you go out to dinner with a group of friends. How many times have you paid your share of the portion of the dinner bill through Venmo or something equivalent, or ordering those supplies on Amazon all the time, especially the things that you need the next day? So it has really become part of our day-to-day existence. Why not make it similar to what we do in the academic setting, in the school setting, in the early childhood settings, and the same kind of seamless integration that you use when you banking or paying bills, or I pay my taxes now online. So the fact that you have that technology at our fingertips and we're not necessarily utilizing it, and then the accountability is only going to continue to increase. And how do we ensure that accountability of those funds? Because at least in the early childhood space where I'm at, there's always a concerns about there's not enough money. There's not enough money. We need more funding for more slots. We need more funding for teachers for salaries, because there are many that are underpaid. Well, that is true. ClassWallet is not going to help solve that problem. But where ClassWallet comes in is helping to maximize the use of those funds that you do have, and minimize the inefficiencies, and minimize the errors and all the angst and hand wringing and teeth gnashing when it comes time to reconcile the books before those auditors show up to audit your books. So it's a choice. You can stay with what you're doing now, and maybe that's good enough, or you can think about how to fully embrace technology to achieve those goals.
Very cool. Love it. I do have to say and by the way, thanks for listening to those other podcasts.
They're great.
Those episodes. Thanks. That was awesome. That was, in its day, that Palm Pilot was a big deal, man. That was, and
I had one.
Nice.
With the cover that you guys talked about.
Excellent. Because that's what made that, is that a cover, and I mean, just lent itself to Star Trek references. So, but
and the beaming of addresses that you talked about, like you point it and shoot it.
This is awesome to talk to somebody who knows what I'm talking about, because that's what it was made for, was the beaming of addresses and dates and times and all that sort of stuff. And but it also worked really well for annoying each other at meetings.
That's true.
Hey, wake up. I like that, but I'm a little geeky that way. So, well, Mike, what I want to do now is, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more from you?
Well, I think first and foremost, ClassWallet.com, our website, is one, and then LinkedIn. I think we can do a lot on LinkedIn and a lot directly on our ClassWallet.com website.
Very cool. So I'll have that information in the show notes, so it's easy for them to click and go find. I got two last questions for you before we finish, though, and they're just questions I like to ask my guests. And the first one is this, Mike. When so much is going on that you're overwhelmed, how do you escape from the desire to give up or quit?
That's a great question. I don't know if it can be overwhelming, can be frustrating, a little like banging your head against the wall, but quitting is not usually one of the options that I think about. Rather, I like to pause, step back, and think about different strategies for how I need to tackle a problem that I'm just not making any progress on. And I think for me, my entire career, maybe it's just my personality, my entire career has been somehow, every single role I've been in has been how to tackle the seemingly impossible challenges. It's kind of a version, maybe it's my version of risk taking, but it's pushing that rock up the hill again and again and again that people say you can't do that. And I say, well, watch me, I'm going to do it. Now, I'm not always successful, and it may take multiple tries, but I think that's been my stubbornness in how to retreat and come back at it. It's like, I love that intellectual challenge of trying to figure out, all right, so what is it going to take to solve that problem? And because ultimately the goal is to help improve the lives of children and families around the country. So it's not about me, it's about what I can do to contribute to that mission.
Awesome. Love it. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
You know, that's an easy one. And I actually, recently I tried to do just that. I think my most memorable and impactful teacher my entire career, including all the way through my doctoral program, was my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Montgomery. Now, at the risk of dating myself, I was in the 6th grade during the Vietnam protest era. And Mr. Montgomery was a stereotypical anti-war hippie with long hair and a leather headband he used to wear and bell-bottom jeans, okay? Imagine that picture. Think of Peter Fonda and Easy Rider. That was Mr. Montgomery. And he was the most unusual but impactful teacher. He would play classical music during the day while we were doing some work, and then like the latest pop music, especially I remember the Beatles all the time, on a reel-to-reel tape deck. Talk about technology. Nice. Reel-to-reel tape deck that he had in the back of the room. And then, you know, on assignments, he would write GPAC on every assignment. Give peace a chance. And so not exactly what you'd think of as a contender for the most impactful teacher that someone would have, right? It's like you're looking for, see, I can see you, Steve, you're looking for like, and how was he impactful given that it's not really quite the description, but he had the most amazing teaching style that made you thirst for learning, which is what we want to see in any teacher.
Very cool. Fridays,
especially, were the best days. We'd come in and he'd give us, and I forgot what they're called. I know I have one in a Foot Locker somewhere. He'd give every student a sheet of paper with a set of questions that covered just about every subject imaginable. He then set you free to roam school and find the answers. And I'm sure that all the administrators and the other teachers hated him because here's this whole class of 30 some odd kids running around the school like maniacs trying to find the answers to these questions. And I still remember, and they're really, really thoughtful. You had to go to the library for some, you had to go to the principal for others. You had to go to just about every place imaginable. And I still remember one of the questions that sticks in my mind, and I used to tell my older kids. It's like, what company has the orb and cross as a symbol? Any guess?
Do not have a guess.
Nabisco. So it was the most, and then he went into some, you know, when he got the class back together, he went into some description about symbols that different companies use. And I mean, that was just one strand of it, but there was geography, there was math, there was history, there was politics, everything. That's just the one that it sticks out into my mind, because every time I have something, or my kids have something that's made by Nabisco, I look at that little symbol, because if you look at the Nabisco product, you see an orb and a cross, and it really stumped a lot of us. So it's just, for me, he was so impactful, and it's just an example of how he pushed us to think outside the box and to seek knowledge in multiple ways and multiple strategies. So I loved having him as a teacher, and he was by far, head and shoulders, the best teacher I had in my entire career.
That's cool. Thanks so much. I love it. Mike, thank you so much for talking with us about ClassWallet and creating efficient pathways for getting the supplies that classroom teachers and administrators need without spending their own money. Great ideas, awesome talk, and I'm wishing you the best in all that you do.
Thank you. Great being here.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.